Tandy mourns its CEO. Epyx beats Data East in court. And Steve Jobs wants to make the Mac a gaming powerhouse. These stories and many more on this month's episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. I'm your host, Carl, together with my co-host,
Peter.
And we're going to be looking back at the biggest stories in and around the video game industry in March of 1979, March of 1989, and March of 1999. As always, we'll be mostly using magazine cover dates from the 20 and 30-year jumps while relying on newspaper articles and historical documents for the 40-year jump, as there weren't many dedicated gaming publications on the market at those times.
And also, as always, it's April by now, so we are already late.
Yes, but we did try. This is our second round recording this. We actually had access to a proper studio, so if you hear a little bit of an echo in the back, that's because we're back in my home office. And fortunately, we kind of screwed up the levels and everything else on that fancy equipment, so we're back in front of my PC with Audacity and doing this a second time. So any spontaneity that this episode may be lacking is up to that. But hopefully that'll lead to something that's slightly more coherent than our usual. So, okay.
I kind of doubt it.
Yeah, so do I. But, oh well. Now, remember, send any comments to us on Twitter at VideoGameNewsR2, or you can just email us any questions or comments at videogameNewsroomTimeMachine@gmail.com. Now, let's get started and go straight back to March of 1979. Wow. Let's go back to March of 1979. Our first story comes from the Wall Street Journal. On March 1st of 1979, they're reporting that Commodore has purchased Micro Display Systems. Now, Commodore was definitely in a buying mood at this point. Just 2 months ago, they tried to buy up the Lafayette retail chain of electronics stores, and now they have purchased Micro Display Systems. MDS is, or at least at the time, was a manufacturer of LED and LCD displays. Now remember, this is 1970s LED and LCD displays, so we're mainly talking about little glowing red displays for things like watches or industrial machine LED displays.
And why were they red?
They were just red because red was the easiest color to produce with an LED. There's chemical reactions that make LEDs glow and different processes to go through, and I'm not technical enough to go into all the details, but it's really one of those things where the easiest one was red. That's why they started out with red, and then later on they got to be able to do more and more colors. The last color that they were able to crack was blue, which I don't believe they actually got until sometime in the 90s. Somebody actually won the Nobel Prize for finally figuring out how to make a blue LED. Here we're talking 79. It's a pretty cutting edge area. Commodore would use MDS's products to make a line of branded LCD watches, and this is when Commodore wasn't exclusively a computer company yet. They were still in the office furniture business, amongst others. And more interestingly, the MDS division of Commodore would go on to make a slew of different products, including monitors for Apple computers and so on and so forth. But probably their biggest contribution to the Commodore line of computers would end up being in 1985, and when they'd make a display for the Commodore LCD computer. And this was a Commodore Plus 4, which was their low-budget office computer. And it had a built-in LCD screen. Now, we looked at a screenshot of it.
Yeah, it looked amazing. You had so many different colors. It was great.
It was a black and white screen. It was basically a extreme landscape version of a Game Boy screen. It could do maybe about 7 or 8 lines of text on it.
It had the same resolution as a Game Boy screen.
Yeah, well, I mean, but spread out. So it had a lot more dots on screen than a Game Boy. Come on. You are maybe misremembering just how few dots were on a Game Boy screen.
Dude, in my memory, the thing all was 3D. It was all around me. I was a kid by then, so.
Yeah. Trust me, it wasn't all that great, but we will be talking about that very soon. So this LCD plus 4 computer was shown off at the January 85 CES. Unfortunately, the then head of Commodore kind of got cold feet. He was told by another industry veteran that LCD was a dead technology. It wasn't going to go anywhere.
And he was totally right about that, as we see now.
Of course. I mean, the Game Boy is proof of that. So the Commodore LCD computer was scrapped. Now, with no use for the home computer line of LCD screens, Commodore very quickly decided that the MDS division just wasn't for them. It wasn't the core business. And in one of the many great decisions of late Commodore management, they sold the company in 1986.
Which was probably their best decision. Didn't they used to do it like develop a product and then right when it was ready to access the market, then to pull the plug and be like, it's gonna be a dead end?
Pretty much. This is Commodore post-Trammell, just doesn't really know what it wants to do, where it's going. And, well, we'll have tons of stories about that as we get into the 1990s and our second jump. But also as we get into the 80s, there's a million stories like this. And the Commodore LCD is just one of those many stories. The idea that Commodore already in 79 has this foot in the LED market, could have exploited it more, could have used the technology the same way they did with their purchase of MOS Technologies, is just, it's a sad, sad testament to what Commodore could have become. But alas, the LCD is an interesting little side note. The Commodore Plus 4 line also never really takes off, and MDS gets sold off. Now, I wasn't able to find an exact death date for the company. I know there's a MDS, which is primarily a software manufacturer today. I do not know if that company is related to this one, but I do know that in 1990, so we're talking 6 years after the sale, they were still manufacturing monitors, and those were being evaluated in PC Magazine. Mm-hmm. So that's the latest I could find about MDS.
Never heard of again.
Yeah, no. They may still be out there, may have changed their names, but unfortunately for research purposes, that was kind of my dead end on that one.
I mean, some of the people surely still exist in the industry.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I actually found profiles of several former engineers who are still in the industry but no longer at MDS. They've moved on. But then again, we are talking about guys who are probably getting close to their retirement at this point.
Speaking about moving on.
Yes. Moving on. Forbes remembers Charles Tandy and looks forward to the company's future in computers. Now, for those who aren't in the United States, the Tandy Corporation, its name and its legacy are going to be less known. What we're dealing with here is the Tandy Corporation was the mother concern of Radio Shack. And the then CEO Charles Tandy was the son of one of the two original founders of the Tandy Corporation, and he's really the one that revolutionized the company post-World War II. Now, he's passed away in November of 78. And of course, with lead times on magazines and everything, Forbes is running a pretty detailed history of his life and a look forward to what it lies in store for the company in their March 5th issue of the magazine. So let's just take a quick look and explain the life and times of Charles Tandy. Like he has said, he was the CEO of Tandy Corporation, passed away in November. The March issue talks about how he took his father's leather goods business over. His father had been making all sorts of leather goods up until World War II, and when they could not get enough material anymore because of rationing during the war,
he just decided to go into the electronics business.
Not quite. There was a few steps in between that. What ends up happening is Charles is doing work with injured soldiers during the war. He sees that one of the things that they're doing is therapy by having them knit or sew and things like that. And because of his background with leather goods, he's like, come on, these are hard notch guys. These are soldiers. They don't want to be messing around with this. They want to be working with leather. They want to do something.
Knitting can be calming, dude.
Knitting may be calming, but it's not really, especially in the 1940s, late 1940s, early 1950s, it is not going to make you look manly, okay? And so he turns his dad's business, which was already suffering because even after the war, it was hard to get the raw materials that they needed, and he turns it instead into a leather crafts business. So instead of manufacturing things like leather wallets, he'll sell you a handful of leather scraps with an instruction booklet on how to make a wallet out of it.
So basically the leftovers.
Exactly. And
Sure.
you can sell those for a lot more money than you could actually get off of the finished product, or at least a higher profit margin because you're saving on the labor. And so he opens up this leather crafts business. First it goes through mail order, then he starts opening shops, and the Tandy leather crafts business then starts to expand into other crafts. And this leads him to purchase, at that time, fairly small and pretty ailing Radio Shack chain. Again, a little bit of historical perspective. Before there were computer geeks, there were radio geeks. The big thing that you could build with electronics, way back in the day, before television, before anything else, were radios.
Dude, I had to write a text once about radio tubes. It's amazing how many different radio tubes there are. It's just, I mean, amazing. It bores the hell out of me, but for people who actually enjoy that, it's surely amazing.
Oh, of course. And this is why when he takes over Radio Shack, they literally have 10,000 items in their inventory, in their list of products that they carry. And he turns that down to only a few thousand. Mm-hmm. He streamlines the company, takes it from, I think it was only 8 stores. And by the time he passes away, there are literally thousands of Radio Shacks all over the country.
Wait, so when did he buy Radio Shack?
He buys Radio Shack in the 1960s.
Oh, so
so he does years. He does it really, really fast. But remember, this is a time when there's a massive expansion after the war of suburbs. The idea of the strip mall is everywhere. So you have these standalone stores. And because Radio Shack is selling a type of good that really nobody else has, it becomes this go-to place for any kind of electronics. You need to fix something in that nice new suburban house that you've got, well, you go to Radio Shack to buy it.
And there were no competitors to him.
No competitors because it's also too niche of a market.
Yeah, speaking of radio tubes.
Yeah, but what it ends up doing is it creates all these employees who know this stuff. And inside of Radio Shack, they're always looking for new products to try to sell. And that's when we get John V. Roach II. Now,
great name.
At the time of Charles Tandy's passing, he's the apparent successor to Charles. And he's also was the man who was responsible for developing the TRS-80. So the Tandy Radio Shack 80 computer. Trash 80, as it's affectionately known, the Trash 80 was one of the Holy Trinity of 1977. One of the 3 home computers introduced at CES in 1977 that included the Apple II, the Commodore PET, and the Trash 80. So there was this thing in the air. Everybody knew the components were out there. You've got Steve Wozniak building the Apple II in his garage out of off-the-shelf parts. You've got Commodore engineers who are know how to make calculators, know how to make watches, basically putting everything together, making a computer.
And you also had those guys who already had stores.
And you had Roach basically playing around in the office trying to figure out a way to use the stuff that they already have to make new products, new things to sell in the store, and he builds a computer.
Dude, I wish my board colleagues would be as productive.
Yeah. Well, what happens is Tandy sees what Roach has built, loves it, tells them they need to go and get it on the market. Now, everybody else is taking years to develop their computers. They do it in 12 months. They go from prototype to it's in the stores in 12 months. It's an absolutely amazing feat, really, when you think about it. And they have a huge advantage over the other guys. Namely, they already have a sales infrastructure. And like we said 2 months ago with Commodore buying Lafayette, there's a reason they need to go into it. Lafayette is basically a competitor of Radio Shack. They're one of the few people trying to compete with Radio Shack. And Commodore is having a hell of a time finding distributors to sell this through. They're trying to sell in department stores. They're trying to sell through specialty. They're trying to sell through mail order. But they don't have the one thing Radio Shack has.
The customer base, I guess.
The customer base, thousands and thousands of locations. And for every location, they've got a small army of employees who are geeks themselves, who know how to understand this stuff. And when you give them a computer, they're going to spend their time. They're going to figure out how it works. And people can actually walk into a Radio Shack, even if they live way outside the big cities, where they don't have a department store, where they don't have maybe one of the very few early specialty shops, and they can actually touch this. It's one thing to read an ad saying, ooh, you can have a computer.
For $5,000.
$5,000, or maybe a little bit less, but not that much less. Just send us the money and trust us that we'll send you something that works.
And that you'll actually enjoy.
Exactly. And instead, you can walk into a Radio Shack, see that this thing works. If you have a question, you don't have to send something by mail, or you don't have to pay a lot of money for a long-distance phone call, which in the 70s was a lot of money. Instead, you just walked or drove down to your Radio Shack and asked them, hey, how do I do this?
So they were basically creating a demand for home computers.
They created a demand for home computers. They created the first experiences for most people with home computers. And the Trash 80 was a very, very low power machine. We're talking a Z80 processor, a Zilog 80 processor. We're talking no video modes. We're talking straight text on a monochrome green screen. But it's something that's functional. It takes off with small business. Small business has been dying to be able to put their books on a computer, dying to stop having to type stuff on a typewriter instead of just typing it on the screen, getting it right, and then sending their letters out this way. Even if it is just a terrible dot matrix printer that they might be using, it's still better than what they've had, and it separates them faster, and it also makes them look more professional, because remember, the big companies all have this by this point, but they're using mainframes sometimes for this. Now the small companies can look a little bit professional. Yeah, but it's still cool. So John Roach, the guy who invents this, is the heir apparent to the Tandy board, to the Tandy management. And there's a fun little line. Forbes asks Roach how they're going to deal with the competition. And this is the funny thing, and the perspective that they didn't quite have at this point. They don't see the competition being Commodore or Apple or even IBM at this point, because IBM is only doing mainframes and the occasional mini computer, but they're not thinking micros yet. Forbes identifies another Texas company, and Tandy is in Texas. Texas Instruments. They think that that is the powerhouse, the company that's going to kick Tandy's butt.
And why did they think that it was Texas Instruments? Just because of the location, or were there other reasons involved?
Well, I think it's primarily because Texas Instruments had a similar starting position to Radio Shack, namely, they were making a lot of the components. So a lot of the pieces that are going into these computers are made by Texas Instruments.
So the independence is one factor.
Well, that would be the thing. Why should Texas Instruments not get into the business when they're the ones providing the parts for it? And IBM is probably not a contender because, well, let's face it, they're too busy with the big stuff. Why would they bother getting into the retail business?
Because this is where the money is.
Yes and no. Remember,
maybe not yet.
I mean, Big Blue is still Big Blue. But the idea here is that Texas Instruments is well positioned to be able to take them on and be able to leverage their production capacity. Something that other companies like Apple simply cannot, because Apple is completely dependent on other suppliers for all of their parts. Commodore has MOS technology, which means actually every Apple sold is a profit margin for Commodore. But what Roach says is quite cool. He says that their 7,000 stores are their one advantage. It's what's going to put them over on Texas Instruments. And Forbes was a little bit right. TI did launch a computer, the TI-99, in late 1979.
Wait, so did TI have any stores out there?
No. See, this was TI's problem. They really didn't have a lot of experience at all in the consumer goods category. I think at this point they'd already done some calculators. TI today, their main consumer product is still calculators. In the United States, and our American listeners will know this, European listeners may not understand what I'm talking about, but it's a standard thing in high school that you have to have a graphing calculator if you're going to go to calculus class. And a lot of universities require calculus class as a prerequisite to get into the university. So you will take calculus class, you will have to get a graphing calculator, which is basically a slightly higher resolution Game Boy with a bunch of keys. And those things are still tremendously expensive. That's a story in and of itself. But something like a TI-99 will still cost you close to $100, even though it's technology that's been around since probably the early 90s. I believe I had a TI-99 when I was in high school, and yes, I'm aging myself, people. This was back in 1994.
Really? And there's still no alternative on the market yet.
Well, this is the thing. I saw a video on this once. They phrase it as designed obsolescence. Because the last thing you want to do is build in a lot of functionalities that, number one, would make cheating possible in exams. Because the students are going to be using the graphing calculator for their exams. So if you built in a Wi-Fi adapter, well, now you could possibly have cheating. Because people could be sending messages back and forth and getting answers from outside of the classroom. In addition to that, you don't want too many of the functions to be automated because, again, cheating. You want to see if the people can actually do the assignment. So you artificially limit what the device can do in order to prevent it from becoming a tool for cheating.
Well, right, but can't there be another company who manufactures those calculators just way cheaper?
Well, and this is the other thing, that you want standardization in all aspects. So the programming language...
So it's an economical program for Texas Instruments.
It's subsidized. It's subsidizing TI at an ungodly rate.
Yeah.
But yeah. So nowadays the thing probably costs maybe $3 or $4 to manufacture, and they're selling it for $9. But that's pretty much the end of TI's involvement. The TI-99 is, for better or for worse, a abject failure. It ends up costing $1,500 at the time. So we're talking 1979. That's way, way more than any other machine on the market. They did release an improved version in 1981, but it was always just an also-ran. It never really had any potential to take on the market, and it never had the retail space.
Right. Where could you buy those things? Was it a mail order purchase?
By the time TI gets in 1979, there's a lot of department stores getting into this. There's some regional chains, like, for example, on the West Coast, you had Fred Meyer's, which was sort of an all-in-one store, kind of like a Walmart. They would have a little computer section at this point. It's starting to get a little bit more acceptance. The Atari 2600 was really the forerunner there, where they realized, okay, this electronics thing has some legs, but it's not going to be until probably 81, 82. The VIC-20 is the one that really breaks through.
So it was basically like, honey, I brought some groceries and also a TI-99.
No, nothing like this. At this point, you don't really have the integration of groceries and department store. So Walmart, for example, doesn't go into groceries until the mid to late 90s. Even today, there are some Walmart locations that still don't do the groceries just because they don't have the capacity for it. And also, at this point, the stores are working on the dry goods principle. They want to be able to store stuff for a longer period of time. There are a lot of logistic issues with having perishable goods in your store.
Right, and there are a lot of health issues being related to eating dried stuff.
Not necessarily. I mean, nobody was really thinking about that then. It was more just the issue that the stores wanted to have product that they can keep in a warehouse so they could plan out their seasons better.
Right.
So, yeah. No, this was interesting. Charles Tandy built a massive company. Later, successive leadership changes would happen at Tandy, but what was laid here, the foundation, this model of we build the computer, we sell it in the store, would ultimately culminate with the Tandy 1000, which was their major entry into the PC compatible business, where they would create their own version of the IBM Junior's graphics card. So you had now a PC compatible that was fairly fast, that had halfway decent graphics, and you could play with it in the store and take it home. I mean, that thing just flooded the market, and that's, for better or for worse, the birth of the IBM compatible as a home machine.
Which makes sense. I mean, standardization in this industry especially.
Especially in this industry, but also just the whole fact that you could touch it. You could feel it. Mom and dad could walk through the mall, go into the Radio Shack store in the mall.
Would be like, this one.
Exactly. And it was not uncommon to see parents basically just drop their kids off to play with the computers for an hour while mom and dad did their shopping and then come pick them up again. And that...
What kind of games could they play on those machines?
You could
like
play
Pong?
almost anything. No, we're talking 286. We're talking a full-blown computer. I mean, you got your King's Quest, you've got your Space Quest, your Leisure Suit Larry's, you've got Maniac Mansion.
So the parents dropped their kids in the mall playing Leisure Suit Larry.
Hey, first time I ever played Leisure Suit Larry was on a friend's Tandy 1000. It was Leisure Suit Larry 3.
Really?
Yeah, Passionate Patty in pursuit of the pulsating pectorals.
Oh, fair enough. And you were in the basement of your friends. But at least you weren't at the mall.
No, we weren't at the mall doing it. But the Tandy 1000 was the gateway drug for the IBM compatible. And I mean, the graphics looked like ass in comparison with, for example, the Amiga. And I even remember scoffing at it going, you paid how much for this? It's not much better than my Commodore 64. But the difference was it was expandable. You could now buy a hard drive for it afterwards. You could now buy, if I wanted to upgrade my standalone keyboard computer, I pretty much had to buy a whole new machine. And even if I did buy a hard drive, there wasn't a lot of support for the hard drive. Most of the games wouldn't allow you to install them. You have to get extra installers that came from the hacker community, which pre-internet was not always that easy to find. Whereas the PC was always adding the functions into the software so that you could make use of the new technology.
Hey, wait. How did you find a hacker pre-internet? You went to the next Radio Shack, be like, hey, you a hacker?
No. Well, trust me, there was a lot of game swapping happening in and around Radio Shacks. That was a huge deal as well. That was the meeting place for other geeks. But also what was happening was you'd have BBSs that you'd call into from your computer. BBS is a bulletin board service. So it was pre-internet. You would get the phone number of somebody who had a computer up and running. You would dial them up with a modem. Their computer would answer, and then you'd have access to the files that were being shared on that person's computer.
File sharing, pre-internet.
Of course. Again,
Okay,
we've talked
never
about
heard
this
of it.
last month. You still need to watch the movie War Games. Then you know what was going on. Believe me, the internet invented very little new. Okay? I can tell you stories about when, as a kid in Argentina, combining phone freaking, BBSs, and piracy. Oh yeah. Any game that came out any place in the world, we had it within 24 hours. That's just how it worked back then. And yes, statute of limitations has expired on all of this, and I'm not proud of any of it. So yes, this kind of stuff happened all the time. But okay, we're done with 1979. We need to move forward, and we're turning on the time machine and jumping to March of 1989. Welcome to March of 1989. Our top story, and we really can't bury the lead on this, Epyx beats Data East in the Ninth Circuit. Computer Gaming World reports on the November 30th, 1988 decision by the Ninth Circuit in the Epyx v. Data East case.
This actually sounds like a game.
And as a lawyer, I can tell you, in many ways it is. It is the most deadly of games. Copyright. No. Now, Data East, a famous maker of arcade games, things such as Dragon Ninja or... Oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm actually completely failing. Sly Spy, and Karnoff, and so on and so forth. Now, Data East sued Epyx for copyright infringement over Epyx's release of World Karate Championship on the Commodore 64. Now, World Karate Championship was Epyx's North American distribution of the English System 3's classic karate game, a one-on-one fighting game called International Karate. This was a slew of games at the time that were all one-on-one fighting games, all using karate. Another game that was big at the time was Way of the Exploding Fist. These games came out in England at a time when Karate Champ, which was Data East's game, was fading a little bit in the arcades. It was a game that had middling success. It had done some good things and had gotten a lot of people's attention, but it didn't set the world on fire as far as the arcades were concerned, partially due to some weird control mechanics. But in England, a couple of different companies jumped on this. One-on-one fighting games sprung up around 1985-86 in a big way. And Epyx, who were looking to start to distribute a more European software in the North American market, had brought International Karate out as World Karate Championship. Now,
Which sounds actually pretty close.
well, it is similar. And World Karate Championship was a very apt title because it was two fighters, and each stage you would be in front of a different international scene. The Golden Gate Bridge, the pyramids, etc., etc. So you were karate fighting around the world in a championship.
So we were basically getting the feeling that you moved around while standing in front of a TV screen. That's actually not bad, man.
Pretty
Not
much,
bad.
pretty
Not
much.
bad.
I mean, the top half of the screen was the background, and the bottom half of the screen was the play field. And you remember, this is Commodore 64, so you're limited to 16 colors out of 16 colors. And so you couldn't play around too much with the contrast. You couldn't make the background too exciting. It had to be limited.
Okay, and two persons could play it at the same time.
In both games, you had two-player options, but you could also play against the computer.
And the arcade version, how did it work? Did player one have to pay a quarter, and player two had to pay a quarter, or how was it?
I've never actually played the original arcade game, and I'd have to look that up. I'm guessing that you did have to put in a quarter each, but I may be completely wrong on that. It may have had a two-player option, but
I mean, from a business model perspective, it just makes sense to take 50 cents for two players and just a quarter for one player.
This game came out in the very early 80s. We're probably talking 83, 84. So
well, then 2 dimes also.
25 cents. No, not 2 dimes. Dimes died in the 60s, okay? So we're talking with 25 cents a play at this point. So, yeah, this would have been a 25 cent a play game, probably for each of the players. And it used a 2 joystick system. So one to control the movement of the character, another one to choose combat maneuvers.
Okay, so you had 4 joysticks on the arcade machine.
Yes. Which, of course, you can't simulate on a home computer at the time because Commodore 64 is using the traditional Atari 9-pin configuration and only supports a 1 fire button joystick.
Okay, then what did they base their lawsuit on?
Well, Data East alleged infringement based on the fact that there's a lot of similarities in the game. Both games are one-on-one karate fighting games with one fighter wearing a red suit and the other one wearing a white suit. Something that may seem very, very unoriginal for System 3 to do. I believe Way of the Exploding Fist also did this. And, well, To say nothing of Street Fighter years later, with player 1 being Ryu, who is wearing white, and player 2 being Ken, who's wearing red. So I believe there is a tradition of this in karate.
A tradition of
I'm
ripping
not
off the game that came before you.
something along those lines, yes, or being inspired by it. The other big similarities were things like the number of moves was identical, not the move set, but the number of moves available, which also makes sense.
So we had 10 moves, and the other game also had 10 moves, and this is what they based their lawsuit on, amongst others.
Don't pin me down on the 10 moves thing, but then again, think about what you're dealing with. On the Commodore 64 game, move left, your character moves to the left. Move to the right, your character moves to the right. Turn around is left and down. Turn to the right is right and down. But if you're already looking to the right, then that becomes a kick move. Down is a crouch. Holding the button and moving in a direction is also going to activate. So basically you have, just like on the arcade cabinet, you've got an 8-way joystick. 4 diagonals, 2 up and down, 2 left, right. And then you also have 8 variations of that, which is holding the button and pointing in those directions.
And can you repeat the moveset?
I'm not going to do that just for your amusement. But what ends up happening is, with the dual joystick configuration, you also pretty much just have 16 moves. So the limitations of the controls are the limitations of the controls at the time.
And you also only had 16 colors, right?
On the Commodore 64, yes.
Yeah,
So yes, and you're talking about an 8-bit system, 64K of RAM. Everything is simply a multiple of 8 at this point, yes. If that's the pattern that you're looking for.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a conspiracy here. Definitely. Math. Go figure. The court actually recognizes a whole laundry list of similarities between the two products. There's also a referee who announces the start, end, and winner through little speech bubbles on the screen. Backgrounds change from level to level. But the original court in the case decided that Data's East claim was valid due to the similarities in the game. Features and feeling were all too similar between the two products. Now, the appeals court rejects that finding and sets an important precedent that would be cited in many, many future cases and is still good law today. The court differentiated between the attributes necessary to achieve the gameplay mechanics the game was supposed to be simulating, aka the karate championship needs to have 2 fighters because karate championships in the real world have 2 fighters. They have to have a ref because, well, you have a ref in these things. You need moves. You're going to have different moves, etc. And what the court really hones in on is the distinct expression of those attributes. In this case, they decided that the 17-and-a-half-year-old average consumer, how they got to that, we do not know. I'd have to read the case. I didn't have time, sorry. Of the product would be able to distinguish between the 2 games and choose the clear winner, which in my opinion is International Karate because it's a much, much smoother game than Karate Champ.
And it's on a different console-ish thing.
Yes, Data East would actually sell the home port rights to Karate Champ. There was a Commodore 64 version of Karate Champ. It came out after International Karate. The idea of a hit arcade game almost immediately getting a port or shortly after getting a port to home systems wouldn't really develop for a few years after the release of International Karate. So by 1989, it was pretty much done deal that if you had a hit arcade game, within about a 9-month window, you would see the home ports.
Okay. But this changes things, I think. I mean, you have 2 games, they are 2 fighting games, and I get it. They are limited to a certain number of moves, and they are limited to a certain way of how it works. Basically, 2 guys beating each other up. What I do not get is, both of them look alike. They have a referee, and we had a look at the video earlier, and the referee is more or less at the same position, and he says more or less the same stuff. So, it is kind of obvious to me that it is a ripoff.
Well, of course, it's highly inspired by it, but...
This is the lawyer talking, right? It's highly inspired.
No. You have to look at it this way. What you're really doing is simulating a real world activity in the computer. And given the limitations at the time, doing 2 separate and different looking characters, different behaving characters, would have eaten up way too much RAM, especially for a game that had to load off a cassette with one load. You're not reloading all the images. And 2 sprites that are just color swap just means that you have only one sprite in memory. That's why the fighters have to look the same. Karate Champ probably was running off exactly the same principle. They just color swapped the outfit, not for some creative need, but because of a technical necessity.
And why did they have to use white and red? I mean, they could have used, I don't know, white and blue.
There aren't that many colors.
Whatever.
There aren't that many colors in these old hardware setups. Like I said, the Commodore 64's got 16 colors. 3 of them are shades of gray. So those are probably out. Then you have black and white. Now you're up to 5 colors already gone. Then you got things like cyan and pink and magenta. You're not going to be using those to appeal to little boys. 8 and 9-year-old boys and the 17.5-year-old.
You might want to get girls into the fighting business, man.
Yeah, that wasn't going to happen at that point. I'm sorry to say. It's not to be sexist. It just wasn't the target market. Now, you might have made it black, but then the character's eyes and hair are black because Commodore 64 sprites pretty much stop at 3 colors. So you can only have 3 colors. So you have to have 1 color for the hair, the eyeball, and the skin color. This is also why you don't have variations in the skin tone of the characters. It's not because they're being racist. It's just there's no other color available. And it's true. I mean, you just don't have that many colors.
Limited to the white color,
dude,
right?
I will show you a G.I. Joe for the Commodore 64 by Epyx. And you can choose from a bunch of G.I. Joe characters. And the character Roadblock, who's a black man from New Orleans, and they try to get a black skin tone out of the 16 colors on the Commodore 64.
And this was way more racist than just...
All I have to say is it's a great game, but you really, really, really have to kind of look away because it's kind of bad. It's not just kind of bad. It's really, really bad. But this was the problem. When they were making these things, they weren't thinking of this as a game machine. They were thinking of this as an all-purpose computer. There's very specific reasons in the chip design that these are the colors that they chose. It wasn't always because they wanted these colors. Red on the Commodore 64 screen was always sort of a weird, muddy blood red. Just because you have to send this frequency to the screen, there's going to be limitations in the frequency and so forth. There's a lot of technical reasons why these specific colors came out. There's not a lot else they can do. Yellow is out because if you have them fighting in front of the pyramids, the ground is going to be yellow. You have brown is out because when they fight in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, they're on a piece of dirt.
They can always fight on grass.
Then green would be out. And
right,
they do fight on grass. There's other levels where they fight on grass. So once
they wanted the variation in the ground they are fighting on.
Exactly. So once you've taken in all of these things into account and you're trying to avoid clash that the body simply disappears into the background, there's not a lot of options left. White and red make perfect sense. And yes, they happen to be the same colors, but looking at the graphics on the on Karate Champ, it's pretty clear that they were probably working with the same, or if not stronger restrictions, less colors even. And so white and red is probably also not something that they chose for some stylistic decision. It was simply lack of alternatives.
Okay. So to sum it up, when I am in a game depicting a everyday situation, 2 guys fighting around the world, it happens to the boat.
Remember, Karate Champ does not really travel around the world. All of those scenes just seem to be a dojo, a waterfall, the docks, basically random scenes from Jackie Chan films.
So 2 guys traveling around places, whatever they might be.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you are not ripping off someone else.
Not really, no. It would have to be the execution. If the average consumer is not going to be confused, okay? If you go onto Steam and you find a game that kind of looks like Skyrim, but you're looking at it and it's clear that the polygon models are not nearly as good and the dialogue is crap
Then I already bought the game thinking it is Skyrim and realized, shit, I bought the wrong game.
Well, and this is the thing. You'd watch a trailer for it. You'd play a demo of
fair
it.
enough.
You'd look at the pictures on the box or, well, back in the day on the box, in this case, on the website, and you would be able to tell this is a different product. So it really comes down to, is the consumer going to be confused between these two products?
Okay. Hey, wasn't there a court case recently meaning in the last 5 or 10 years, Apple versus Samsung?
Yes. Well, there's been many of those.
Yeah,
oh my God. They've been suing each other for decades now. But yes. And this case comes up again and again in lawsuits over not just games, and it does come up in games, but also in lawsuits concerning things like the look and feel of a GUI, of a graphic user interface. That will always keep popping up. And this is the key case that says, would the average consumer really be confused? A, and B, if you're trying to implement a certain type of system and the general system, the general idea is not copyrightable, or in this case, probably has already run out of copyright because of how long GUIs have been around, then there's going to be certain basic elements that are required for that expression of that idea, and those cannot be copyrighted. You cannot simply say, well, I simulated it first, so now nobody else can simulate it. That would stifle development. And the funny thing is, Data East actually cites this case years later when they get sued by Capcom for one of their fighting games. Capcom, the maker of Street Fighter II, sues Data East for another fighting game that Data East has brought out, saying, oh no, it's too much like Street Fighter II. And Data East turns around and says,
screw you.
Doesn't matter. Data East versus Epyx. We got our asses handed to us. Now we get to also make one-on-one fighting games.
We hand your asses to you. Did they win?
Oh, of course. That was the end of that. Capcom wanted to actually go after a whole bunch of people because, well, Capcom introduces new things like the combo system or special moves where you have to do a combination of moves. And everybody started doing that. And that Data East versus Capcom case puts an end to that very, very quickly.
Okay, but using a combo, they did it first. It's not like I don't know. I somehow have a problem with that.
Well, and this is again the thing of you want to simulate a more complex move, a move that requires multiple facets. How else are you going to do that with a joystick?
Yeah, but just because no one can think of another way doesn't necessarily mean there is not another way.
And this is the thing. Other people had also done some combo move stuff in the past. It wasn't completely new that a motion combination triggered something in a video game. But they were trying to claim, using it in a fighting game, in this scenario with super colorful characters. You can't say, oh, our characters are colorful. Well, great. It's the movie The Warriors. Congratulations. You've reinvented 1970s cinema. Get out of here. So, yeah, this is the end-all, be-all. That is finito. Data East loses, and everybody can now open up genres. And this is also important. Remember, the idea of genres is still just getting going at this point. So instead of everybody having to come up with a brand new complete idea, you can build on what other people have done before and really start to invigorate the industry. So now you already had RPGs and so forth, but now you can get more and more genres where somebody says, oh, these guys did a good job. It's an interesting idea, but we can make it better. The constant drive to make a better mousetrap gets going right here.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
It's just...
And we have all benefited from it. Just imagine if we were stuck only with the driver series and didn't have GTA 3.
True enough.
There you go.
Although I've never played GTA 3, dude. I got into it with GTA Vice City.
Well, it's the same game engine, only Vice City was had a little bit more style. It's still probably my favorite game in the series, but yeah.
Yeah, I still remember the music.
Now, we need to move on. We got a lot more stories. In March of 1989, Epyx is not just in the news for beating Data East. They're looking to expand. Now, we've mentioned here before how the European market was very, very different from the American computer game market. In Europe, you're still basically using cassettes for almost everything. The US is a purely disc-based market at this point, but at the same time, the consoles are really taking a bite out of the computer gaming market in North America. The NES is in full blown. It's the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive has just been launched in Japan for Christmas of '88, and they know it's coming. So the American computer game makers are struggling to figure out what is next. The Amiga has collapsed in North America. There is no heir apparent to the throne because the IBM PC is still stuck in 16-color EGA land. And so the American computer game manufacturers are looking to expand and get more product from Europe to try to fill the gap in the action genre. Epyx is doing this by looking to buy Infogrames. Epyx was known for their multi-event sports titles primarily, and as we heard, they were now importing games and distributing them in North America from System 3 and other manufacturers. But now they want to outright buy French software house Infogrames. It looks like the agreement is set with the respective boards of directors and Infogrames shareholders approval the only block to stopping the acquisition. Infogrames is to supply Epyx with at least 6 new titles in 1989, according to Computer Gaming World. Infogrames was close to bankruptcy at the time and was eager to be bought up to keep their operations going. Bruno Bonnell, the co-founder and longtime head of Infogrames, was certain the deal would go through, but at the last minute, the Epyx board nixed the deal. It's not confirmed, but by the end of 1989, Epyx's ill-fated venture into hardware development that would culminate with the Atari Lynx, internally they were calling it the Handy Project, and an over-reliance on the C64 as their main development platform, and overall bad management would lead to the company filing for bankruptcy in late 89, and ultimately the company would dissolve shortly thereafter.
Well, first Commodore, no Epyx. I kind of see a pattern here. It's like the multiples of 8 pattern in the last topic.
Well, Commodore wouldn't actually collapse until 94 because they had a very strong European operation going on. But what's really happening is that the 8-bit keyboard-based computer market is struggling to figure out a way to do a generation transition. They wanted to do it in 85 with the Commodore Amiga and the Atari ST. So Atari had an 8-bit computer line, Commodore had an 8-bit computer line. Apple also in 1985, they wanted it in 84, but really they don't achieve it until 85. They introduced the Mac. Now, the Mac would be a lost leader until the early 90s. It would keep losing money, and they would have to live off of the Apple II variations, Apple IIe, Apple IIc, Apple II GS. They would keep upgrading the Apple II until it was essentially a 16-bit computer.
And why did they stick to the Mac when it was losing money for, what did they say, 5 years?
5 or 6 years, yeah. Because Steve Jobs wanted... And, well, this is a whole big thing, but Steve Jobs basically could not admit that he wasn't good. Without Wozniak's designs, Apple didn't have anything. And the Mac was an overpriced hunk of junk. It was an impressive idea, but the original Mac ships with 128K of RAM, which is not nearly enough for the operating system that it's trying to lug around at a time when 128K of RAM is a lot of RAM and a lot of money. The integrated screen means that it has limited usability for a lot of people. You can't upgrade the screen. Video games are completely forgotten because it's purely black and white screen. Oh. The one-button mouse concept basically becomes a problem for them in the long run, just on usability issues.
A one-button mouse?
It still is only a one-button mouse.
Just
because it was the idea that it's so easy to use and blah, 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 blah. So the Mac at this point is still losing money. They're trying to reinvent it. They're changing the chips out and so on and so forth. By 89, it's a color machine and everything, but it's way too expensive. And its big benefit is very high resolution, but that comes at an extreme price. The home computer market just never manages in the United States, at least that transition to the 16-bit era. They manage it in Europe without a problem. Everybody switches over to Amigas and Atari STs. The English also try to make that jump with the Archimedes. They don't really achieve it. And they falter then when it comes time for the 32-bit jump. They simply have no product for the 32-bit jump. Commodore tries it in the early 90s with the Amiga 1200 computer, but it's way too little too late. The IBM PC is slowly coming into the market, and game consoles take that lower tier market away from computers. So the people who can't afford a $1,200 or $1,300 computer, they just buy a $600 console and move on to that. And in North America, the computer market goes IBM PC and never looks back. But at this point in 89, everybody's thinking, well, maybe we can keep the C64 market going a little bit longer. Our big problem is that we don't have enough action games, and Europe has nothing but action games. Let's buy a whole bunch of their back catalog, sell it to the Commodore 64 users in North America, and they'll be happy because we can sell it to them cheap instead of a $50 or $60 Nintendo cartridge, because those things are expensive.
Right. Let's sell old games. That should work.
Exactly. Unfortunately, Epyx at this point is already so broke. They've been plowing millions into the Handy project, and it's just not going to happen. Like I said, by the end of 89, they're filing for bankruptcy. Done deal. Infogrames, on the other hand, would go on. They would survive through some massive cost-cutting measures to emerge stronger during a video game stock market bubble that would happen in France in 1990-91. This would lead to their acquisition of English mega publisher Ocean, best known for a lot of their movie licenses and arcade ports. American publisher Accolade, which was founded by early Activision dissenters. And later even the Atari name would become Infogram property through their acquisition of Hasbro Interactive. And this would continue with them adopting the Atari name, renaming themselves Atari, and they continue to produce games under that name today, more or less. For the most part, Atari is just a husk of what it used to be, or Infogram is a husk of what it used to be. They use the Atari logo as their main logo. They sell a bunch of the old games that they haven't hawked off for cash. And you can even buy Microprose's old Airborne Ranger for the Commodore 64 for $5 on their website today as a digital download.
Who would do that?
That is an excellent question I do not have an answer to.
Okay.
And, well, the Atari box is still vaporware after a few years. So, basically, Infogram survives, has a great history, does some amazing products over the next few years, including Alone in the Dark, but they survived not getting bought by Epyx. So, yeah. And on this note, just special thanks to Alex of They Create Worlds. Helped me a lot with this story, as well as the Digital Antiquarian. They both contributed information on what happened behind the scenes here in this deal. Okay, talking about acquisitions, of course, Epyx isn't the only American publisher trying to keep the boat afloat. Hewson, the English developer, gets U.S. distribution through Microprose's Medalist affiliated label program. Computer and Video Games in the UK is reporting that Hewson, a well-known UK developer and publisher famous for games like Iridium, Exelon, Nebulous, and Eliminator, will get their games published in the US by Microprose. This is kind of a big deal, as we've said. The markets are starting to coalesce, and Hewson needs this. Hewson has been trying to get into the 16-bit market with their games. They're struggling to get onto 16-bit home computers in Europe, and this cash infusion of using their back catalog for US markets is a big, big deal for them.
Then why did those companies not just publish the games themselves in the US?
The US is a tough market. You have to remember, Europe is very, very compact. Okay?
And highly fragmented.
England, highly fragmented, but very, very compact. So, for example, if you're in England, at the time, there's 2 or 3 big retail chains, and that's 90% of your market. So, if you want to distribute to them, you've got 3 or 4 buyers for these companies that you have to talk to, and that's it. If you convinced the buyer of Dixon's, that was one of the big stores at the time, to carry your game, you already had a third of the market covered. In the United States, it's much more fragmented. Every area of the country has different needs. There's a famous story about how when Electronic Arts first got started, their big thing was they were also going to be a distributor as well as the publisher and the developer. Although the development starts considerably later in '88. But what they go for very early on is we need a distribution chain. And they sit there. They have a bunch of people in the office. They get telephone books from every corner of the country. And they go through every telephone book looking for stores that might be interested in carrying computer software. And they call them up.
They handpicked the stores.
Exactly.
How long did that take?
It must have taken forever.
Jesus.
But this was the thing. This was the only way to do it. You had a couple of big chains in the United States like Sears and so forth. But especially in the early 80s, they're not as omnipresent as anything else. And because the big chains like Sears are simply not carrying that much computer stuff at this point, or they have very limited shelf space per store, they're not going to be carrying 100 different titles. I remember as a kid walking into Sears, and they might have in 1988, 89, even before that, maybe 50 titles on the shelf. That's not a lot. And in England, remember, they are producing a ton of games. If you look through an old English magazine of this time, there's always a minimum of 40 or 50 new titles a month coming out. So what's happening is that all of these games are coming out. A lot of them are being sold in convenience stores, on racks. That's how Codemasters and Mastertronic get into the business. They're just selling it on a rack for $1.99. Those are the budget titles. You can buy a brand new game on a cassette for $1.99. And the idea here simply was, it's so cheap, there's no point in piracy, even though everybody still did it. And you need
Which brings us back to why do people stuff? Because they can.
Because they can, exactly. But you had all of these games coming out. You had all of this stuff, but you had no way to properly distribute it until these distribution channels come along. And what Microprose is doing here, and just for everybody's edification, Microprose was run by Wild Bill Steely and Sid Meier, two names that you may have heard of. At the time, they were very famous for their simulation and strategy titles like Gunship, F-15 Strike Eagle, and Pirates. This is all before Civilization hits. Now, there's a telling quote from Bill Steely speaking about why they're going to use their affiliated label for the Medalist games. And he says, the American market, this quote, the American market has fallen over itself with very complex products. We need product which you can fire up and play almost immediately.
And this is not a quote, you need to dumb down the market.
Not dumb it down, just remember it. If you had to learn all the buttons for Gunship, and there were over 30 buttons that did something in the game, or at least it felt like that, it was like homework. You were missing out on an entire group of people who just wanted to play games like they were doing on the NES. A game like Mario Brothers, it doesn't explain how it works.
Because it doesn't need to. You get everyone.
Exactly.
It's dumbed down to the point that you can get everyone to play it. Not to master it, just to play it.
And there was no reason those kind of games couldn't exist for the Commodore 64. We got them on the Commodore 64.
Well, true.
We had the Great Gianna Sisters. We had Mayhem in Monsterland. We had Creatures. We had these games, CJ's Elephant Antics. They were great little jump and run, fun, simple games. We could have had those earlier, but the US market refused to do it. And the UK market was just pumping out very, very fast, quick, cheap games. So you weren't getting the polish that the Japanese were putting in. And the polish the Americans were putting in was going into products that were way too complex. So if you could combine the polish of the US market with the fast action that was a completely different programming skill for the most part from the Europeans, because the Europeans, the graphic routines were much faster, much smoother, much nicer looking. But the American games had the benefit of being on disk, multi-load. You could have done a lot more with them. So American games always looked sort of clunky, but had more depth. English games, much smoother, silkier graphics, but they had to work in one load off a cassette. And so they did get some of their games into the US market through Medalist, but again, it's all way too little too late. The Christmas season 89 is going to be terrible for Commodore 64 software. And yeah, everybody's going to have to either bite the bullet and go the path of the NES, or they're going to have to go the path of the IBM compatible. There's going to be no middle ground here. So let's move away from dying sides of the industry to visionaries of the industry. And we've got two stories this month. One of them is about Peter Molyneux. Now,
that story ends well.
Oh, yeah. Well, this month in Ace Magazine issue 18, we get probably the first documented case of Peter Molyneux lying through his teeth for a publicity stunt. Now, for those not in the know, Peter Molyneux is famous as the creator of the God game, and also for the never realizable promise in game features. So in this issue, we've got a preview of Populous, the first God game. It's a real-time isometric strategy game where you play a god and you have to basically help a group of ancient primitives build up a civilization so they are powerful enough to go and kill the other gods' civilization. Absolutely fantastic game, cutting edge, one of the first 16-bit exclusive games ever made. Just huge. It's all over the mags this month. All the English publications have it. And in Ace 18, we see what is now the infamous Lego model. Now, the story Peter was promoting at the time was that they had built a Lego landscape to test concepts for the game during development, and that he even tried to simulate the water that is in the final game by filling the model, which caused a mess.
You cannot fill Lego with water.
Well, yes, we know that, and it's a fun little anecdote, that he thought maybe it'll hold water. But while this was a really cool story at the time, we have found out in hindsight that it was an invented story. The Legos were purchased just before the reporters showed up, and the story was pulled out of Peter's hidey hole.
So wait. How did that work? He went to his intern and be like, hey dude, buy some Lego, I want to tell a great story?
Basically, yeah. Now, the thing here is, and this is not to be understated, Populous is a game that doesn't have pre-made levels. It is randomly generating the levels based off of a code system.
Okay, and this is a problem because...
It's not a problem, but at the time there were very few games that did this. Most games had designed levels, and pretty much what he's trying to do here is sell the idea that these are designed levels, that this game has hundreds and hundreds of designed levels in it, which is complete and utter nonsense.
So instead of saying we wrote an algorithm that is able to randomly create workable levels, which actually is a pretty cool thing, right? He said, no, we set some guys down and they handmade hundreds of levels, which is basically what everyone else is doing.
But he probably, if he had been pressed on it, he would have had to admit it. But this whole idea, we tried out concepts on the Lego. You couldn't try out concepts on Lego because you were doing it randomized. What it really is he's trying to build up a legend around this game. At this point, Bullfrog has only had one semi-successful product, and that was a game called Flood, forgotten nowadays. And he just basically wants to make a really good impression in front of all these people. He's come up with this story. On its own, it wouldn't be a big thing, but it seems to have given him this first taste of, I need to be the showman. It's okay if I start telling little white lies. Unfortunately, those little white lies start becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and they turn from being fun little background stories about, or myths, if you will, about how the game that is being shipped actually came about, to, we're 3 years out from shipping, but I will tell you right now what will be in the game. Or we are 3 months out from shipping, and I'm going to tell you about this great feature that we haven't even started developing yet. And nobody back at headquarters knows I'm about to mention, because I've never mentioned it to anybody else, but I'm inventing it right now, and I'm going to promise the world that it's going to be in the final product.
So he was basically destroying really, really good games by setting expectations so high that they can only be disappointed.
Bingo. And
that is marketing 101, guys.
Exactly. So the rise and eventual fall of Peter Molyneux are both right here in this one article. And if you want to see the image of the Lego model for yourself, all the links to all the sources that we're using on all these stories are, of course, in the show notes. And our final bit of wisdom from a luminary in 1989 comes from Ken Williams, who muses about what might replace home computers. So in the spring 1989 Sierra newsletter, Ken Williams, the founder of Sierra Online, muses in his editorial somewhat whimsically about whether the PC is truly the future of home entertainment or whether it will be, quote, a forgotten fad replaced by intelligent telephones and super sophisticated TVs, end quote.
So judging from the crowd in a train today, he was right.
The man was always 5 steps ahead of the curve.
And I already knew this when I played the game from Sierra where there was a pharmacist who was a cowboy, or a cowboy was a pharmacist. It was great. Utterly great.
Freddie Farkas, Frontier Pharmacist, by the one and only Al Lowe. Yes.
Yeah. And when I played this, I knew this guy is able to invent time traveling.
Okay, you may be overselling it just a tiny, tiny little bit, but yes, Freddie Farkas was an amazing game.
It just came from Peter Molyneux. I cannot oversell anything.
No, Ken Williams was always ahead of the curve. His choice of words is amazingly prophetic. Intelligent telephones, okay? And is kind of interesting, especially since the rest of the editorial talks about Prodigy, the then recently launched online service, and PC Globe, a pre-CD era interactive atlas. Now, he was looking to the future and would help bring it about because Sierra would launch their own online service in 1992, as well as Sierra
What infrastructure did they use by then?
It was actually a deal together with, I believe, AT&T, the big telephone company in the United States. So they essentially had their servers, which I believe were just standard PCs, and what they offered was some online gaming content. They had a graphical MUD. Basically, it was a role-playing game that you could play. It was still turn-based movement, but it wasn't a 3D environment or anything like that. But you could play with
other people in the web.
Yeah. Red Baron, which was also a game that they developed, could also be played online over their network.
Oh, it could?
Yeah. They also had chat rooms. They also had the license for Hoyle's Book of Games. It's a famous card manufacturer in the United States. Hoyle's been around for 100 years. And they were releasing home software of basically card games that you could play on the PC, Bridge and Rummy and Solitaire and whatever else. But you could now play them online over the network.
And you do not need a large bandwidth for that games.
Exactly. These were relatively low bandwidth. They were designing games that were actually playable at that time on the bandwidth that was available. So, and remember, this is all pre-internet. The internet hasn't been opened up yet. So you're still doing it through a dial-in directly to the server, similar to the old BBSs.
Yeah, as I said, as soon as I played the Cowboy Pharmacist game, I knew this guy.
There you go. Okay, so that concludes our March 1989 trip. Let's move forward to March of 1999. And we start off with a quick follow-up on the story that's been in the news for the last few episodes, namely the Dreamcast launch. Now, Dreamcast fever is still high as the US and European launches get closer. They will all happen later in 99. But the biggest title on the Dreamcast slate is Shenmue. So far, it has always been known as Project Berkeley. It finally gets a big reveal in Japan and a new name. Amazing weather and lighting effects, the introduction of the QuickTime effects system for cinematic interactive action sequences is shown off, which at this point really wasn't all that new if you had been in the arcades and already played Sega's arcade game Die Hard Arcade, which came out in 1996. They also used QuickTime events. But Shenmue would just wow audiences through its open world environment. This idea of a fully real-time rendered 3D world that you could walk around in, talk to people and so forth, just captured people's imaginations like very few other things before it.
And didn't save the Dreamcast.
It did not save the Dreamcast for many, many reasons, including the fact that it was way, way too expensive. GTA 3 would show how you do this on a budget using ray casting and so forth later on. Now, another thing that wouldn't help the Dreamcast was the fact that Namco, according to...
So all we're talking about is pointless right now.
Yeah,
Great.
sort of. It's not pointless. It's interesting historical anecdotes.
Yeah, I see a topic for today.
Yeah, Computer and Video Game Magazine in the UK is reporting on a rumor they've heard that Namco may release more games for the Dreamcast. Now, anybody who knows the history of Sega knows that they had really, really good relationships with third parties during the Sega Genesis years, and they burned all of those bridges, first with the 32X, the Sega CD, and especially with the Sega Saturn. Burnt their bridges with the retailers by launching the Saturn early. They burnt their bridges with third parties by launching the Saturn early. They burnt their bridges with developers by creating a piece of hardware that was a freaking nightmare to develop for, etc., etc. So the Dreamcast has a lot of strong first-party titles coming for it, a lot of super interesting things, but there's not a lot of third-party support, and it looks like that ice might be breaking, and Namco could be the one to deliver it. CVG says that there are rumors that a graphically improved Dreamcast version of Tekken 3, as well as Time Crisis 2 and Soul Calibur, will be shown at the March Tokyo Game Show. Soul Calibur would become a launch title for the Dreamcast in North America and Europe later that year. This is a one-on-one fighting game. Series is still going today. Namco would soon lose interest in Sega's machine, though, only release a few basic releases like Namco Museum. All the major franchises. Oh, come on, man. Miss Pac-Man. Who wouldn't want to play that on a Dreamcast? Now, all the major franchises Namco was developing at the time would be reserved for Sony's next system, the PlayStation 2. And they would help push the PlayStation 2 to absolutely new heights. So this short dalliance with Sega was just that, a dalliance. Coming back to North America, our big story for this month is Steve Jobs wants to make the Mac into a gaming powerhouse.
It's really not a good year for the gaming industry, right?
99 is an amazing year for the game industry. The launch of the Dreamcast really can't be understated for a lot of the first that it does and the way it starts to push the technology. But 99 actually has a lot of good stuff because it's really when the 3D accelerators push the PC into new heights. And online gaming is also really starting to take off. The internet penetration is now really getting going. But let's not get lost in the big stuff. Let's look at the details. So Next Generation Magazine has a lengthy interview with Jobs, who has announced that the next-gen Macs will be using the ATI Rage 128 3D accelerator cards to give them the muscle necessary to compete with Wintel machines. Now, Jobs focused on the vertical integration of the company's supply chain and development process as a big advantage to making a go at gaming for the Mac. Of course, this also means that you won't be updating your hardware all the time because you have the standard graphic card in your machine and, well, everybody's going to be developing for that one graphic card. So his whole statement about cutting edge stuff, it doesn't really hold up under scrutiny. He also says that developers don't like Direct 3D because it doesn't take advantage of the latest features and the new hot chips, which, remember, you won't have because you are going to buy a Mac with the standard card and you're not going to upgrade until you buy the next one, which will be Peach. Of course, the fact that, sorry, if I sound really aggressive towards Macs, I am. Of course, the fact that Direct 3D and not OpenGL would become the industry standard within the next 24 months kind of torpedoed this idea before it could even get off the ground. What Jobs also does have, though, is one ace up his sleeve, and that is the first commercial PlayStation emulator, the ConnectX Virtual Game Station, which gets shown off at the same Mac show where he introduces these new Macs with 3D accelerators.
So the ace he had up his sleeve was an ace from another company he just ripped off.
Basically, yes. What he's saying is...
Marketing 101.
It's
There we go
Marketing
again.
101. Guess what? We don't need to develop all new games. We have an entire library of hundreds of popular titles you can just jump right into.
Right before the launch of the PS2.
It's still 2 years out, so he's still got a little bit of time on it. But it's less than a year before the launch of the Dreamcast. That is a little shaky. Now, the emulation was very solid, and with the PSX being the dominant game system of the time, this was no insignificant addition to the Max Games library. Now, Sony, of course, wasn't going to take this lying down and filed a lawsuit against the program shortly after its commercial release, and by April of 1999, a court had placed an injunction on the sale of the program, with existing retail inventory still available for purchase, but no further units could be shipped until the case was resolved. Ultimately, the case was dismissed by an appeals court in February of 2000.
No shit.
Handing Connectix a considerable win, but by then the PS2 was on the horizon, the Dreamcast had already been out for 6 months, and the momentum had been lost.
How the heck could they have won?
Very simple. Emulation itself is not illegal. As long as you're using a clean room environment to develop the tools and you're not copying any software from the original manufacturer, there's really nothing that you're violating by making something that acts just like the other thing if you did it through observation.
So, if I write a program that can emulate the current gen consoles, the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 and the Nintendo Switch, and I sell this program for $10, I can make billions of euros with that without being sued by any of those companies.
And you would have to be a better programmer than John Carmack to make a current gen PC actually perform on that level through emulation.
And this is the last time you guys have heard me.
Exactly. We keep him around for comic relief, in case you hadn't noticed. So, Connectix would end up selling the Virtual Game Station software to Sony in March of 2001, and of course Sony would immediately discontinue. So that was the end of that one. Back in the realm of popular computer video games, Walmart has decided to ban the sale of violent video games in their stores.
But they're still selling guns.
Of course, because guns don't kill people. Bad people who played violent video games kill people. Don't you know
After
anything?
buying guns, right, yeah, sure.
So Walmart...
This is a shout out to our sponsors, the NRA.
Exactly. Oh, man, we are so going to get a lot of bad email after this one. Okay, Walmart decided to ban violent video games starting the first of the year. This would include popular titles like House of the Dead and Time Crisis 2. This ban wouldn't be absolute, but it led to a lot of games getting special editions for Walmart, which was selling about 25% of all gaming software in the US at the time. Which would also explain why, for a few years there, the hunting games were the #1 selling software title in the United States. Because Walmart people were buying them.
Well, here it is Farming Simulator, so...
You're right,
does
we
it
are
tell
in
about
Germany,
it?
and Farming Simulator is
big
huge.
on the market, obviously.
Have you seen Farming Simulator for the Commodore 64?
I haven't seen any Farming Simulator. I really can't.
No.
imagine
Actually,
why
the
someone would
latest
buy that.
edition includes a Commodore 64 port.
Oh.
They programmed a new port of Farm Simulator for the Commodore
Really?
64. I'll show you later. It's absolutely brilliant. Anybody with interest in it, check it out on YouTube. It's just amazing to look at.
Okay, but then we had Violet Game Walmart Edition.
We had Violent Game Walmart Edition. So you get things like, instead of red blood, green blood, or certain nudity things taken out, or whatever else. Those were for the bigger publishers, the ones who could afford that kind of separation of their market. If you're producing only, let's say, 10,000 units of a game, you're probably not going to split that up into a 50% for Walmart, 50% for these guys. You don't have the numbers to scale up like that.
But when you're selling in Germany, you can't just sell the game you're selling in Germany, put the English audio file in it, and sell it through Walmart.
The German one was already the castrated version.
Right.
Walmart didn't go that crazy with their anti-violence, okay? But we can talk about German censorship at this time in video gaming on a whole different episode, because that's a story in and of itself. But Walmart has decided to push this through. Some publishers, like I said, are going to develop special versions just for them. Other ones are just going to actually change the way they make their games. They're just going to make the games less violent to appease Walmart. Now, speaking of Walmart, for a long time, they had an exclusive deal with GT Interactive as their distributor. And GT Interactive had lost that a few years earlier and now was trying to figure out a way to stay solvent, and they are gobbling up companies. They've grown as a publisher. They started out originally in home video. They were the exclusive distributor of home videos for Walmart for several years before getting into video games. And up until 1997, so 2 years earlier, they had been the exclusive provider of entertainment software. Now, that was a huge boon for them. That meant anybody who wanted to sell a game in Walmart had to first sell it to GT Interactive, who then got a cut, be it EA or whoever. Walmart decided to purchase software from a handful of major publishers directly in 97. That included EA and LucasArts. And GT was still a major force on Walmart shelves, but they were losing ground and wanted to expand their own stable of game output to no longer rely on other publishers. This meant acquisitions, and acquired they did. Their latest purchases are the studio's Legend Entertainment, and at that time Legend was developing The Wheel of Time, and this was an RPG based on a book series by Robert Jordan, absolutely huge at the time. You couldn't go anywhere without Wheel of Time being all over the bookstores. It was basically the Game of Thrones of its day, but without the TV show backing it up. And Reflections, another studio, a legendary one, they started out back in the 8 and 16-bit days in Europe, probably most famous for the Shadow of the Beast series and Destruction Derby, both for Psygnosis. And they were working on a little title at the time called Driver. And for those not in the know, Driver was basically an open world crime, driving, and walking around game, but done on the PlayStation 1. So a whole generation before DMA Design would take their Grand Theft Auto design to the PlayStation 2. Driver's already doing this on the PlayStation 1. And later on they'd also do some open world ports on the Game Boy Advance, but the less said about those the better. Valiant efforts, definitely interesting to look at, but not really what you'd call playable. So GT Interactive is getting ready and preparing themselves for this open world 3D game through the purchase of Reflections. And in somewhat related news, Take-Two announces a new label called Rockstar. So, publisher Take-Two announces the formation of a new publishing label called Rockstar. This label would mainly publish for DMA Design. Now, DMA Design at this point is still the legendary creators of Lemmings, but their last two games have been huge hits, namely GTA, Grand Theft Auto 1 and 2. Now, at first, it would just be a publishing label. So, on several of their games, it shows up as published by Rockstar, but DMA Design as developer still appears on the packaging. Later on, this would change, and DMA Design ultimately would simply get renamed to Rockstar Games, and as Take-Two started to rename all of their studios Rockstar. Rockstar North is the ultimate name DMA Design would take. That's still what they develop under for the GTA series today, but we also have Rockstar West and so on and so forth.
It's a cooler name than DMA.
DMA was a cool name. DMA, don't underestimate it, especially back in the Lemmings days when they had this weird logo which was the head of a barbarian facing off with the head of some weird sci-fi character. It was really messed up. But DMA is actually a term from electronics, from the electronics part of the computer. DMA was a cool thing. It was a great company. Unfortunately, the original founder of the company would leave shortly after the launch of GTA 3, but
we're getting super successful. I need to leave.
I think he was kind of burning out on always doing the same thing. Plus, he just didn't really work with the whole management structure and publishing structure. He had made his money by then. Don't worry about it. He's doing just fine. So, okay, that finishes our time travel trip for this month. Any final parting words, Peter?
Well, I mean, we covered a whole lot of interesting topics today, amongst others, how to do proper marketing and that all companies go broke. So who am I to add anything to that?
Words of wisdom greater than these have never been spoken.
Exactly.
Dear listeners, remember, follow us and tweet at us at Video Game News R2. I know that sounds weird, but they didn't let me do Video Game Newsroom Time Machine on Twitter. Also, you can send any questions or comments to videoGameNewsroomTimeMachine@gmail.com. Please remember to subscribe to always get the latest episode whenever we finally get around to pushing it out. And yeah, have fun.